It never fails to surprise me how many people are still looking for permission to do the things that they want to do. You may be one of those. I find myself drawn to reading the comments on various videos I watch, and also reading comments on posts on messaging boards I'm a part of. And a large amount of them, when it's anything creative, they seem to relate to one of two themes. It's either, am I doing the right thing, or can I do this? Or, wow, you're so brave for doing this thing that I don't feel like I'm confident enough to do. There's this suggestion that before we can do something, we have to have either the validation or the approval from someone else to say, yes, that's appropriate, or yes, it will work, the guarantee of an outcome. Or we need to have some degree of certainty that that there's some value to it, which for the most part relates to the outcome itself. In many ways, sometimes it's just the act of having the desire, or apparently the permission to begin, that we're looking for. And I remember when I started making these videos, like many other things I've started in life, there's a sense inside of me, there's a voice in here somewhere that says, no one will care about what you do. There's no value in what you do. No one is interested. It's boring. And I did it anyway to challenge that voice, because experience has taught me, as long as I believe the voice inside that represents the desire to stay comfortable, I'll never experience growth. And I've also come to realize that if I do something and it doesn't work, then I have the option to stop, but I also have the option to continue. And in this case, for me, making videos is an expression of some deeper creative urge, I would say, or sense, that seeks to find expression outside of the normal realms of work or daily life. And I've come to realize that by engaging with people who are doing things that they enjoy and have just invited viewers along for the ride, it's given me a sense of appreciation for doing things for their own benefit. The validation is great if it comes, but if it doesn't and you stop, then is the thing that you're doing really something that you want to be doing intrinsically for yourself because you truly care about it? Or are you just doing it because you think it's going to make you more popular or richer or more desirable in some way? And if it's the latter of those things, then you have the opportunity to ask yourself, what do you think that you lack in this moment that this achievement is going to give you? And there are so many people driven by the desire for some kind of external approval, who go to great lengths to create, in some cases, amazing things, who arrive at this point where the approval comes or the validation comes, and they find it doesn't fill that need. They're still unfulfilled. They're still seeking more. And many of these people will turn to less healthy means of indulgence or expression to try and deal with that. If we're moving forwards to try and find something to fill a gap which exists in this moment, we will never find it. Because the gap is perceived. It's an idea that at some point has entered into our minds, either by the suggestion of someone or some other force outside of us, in other words, society, or appears to have, or our conditioning, or it's an idea that we've had in a moment where we felt less connected to life. And it's occurred to us that maybe if I do this thing over here, or I go on this show, or I make this type of content, or I create this art, or have this job, it will solve this problem of the lack of fulfillment that I experience in this moment. I'm no stranger to that. And I would say that that feeling has motivated the entire course of my life, for better and for worse. And for better because, of course, I've made lots of decisions which haven't yielded particularly positive results. But also because it's kept me looking for what's actually true. And nothing that comes and goes can be considered to be true. It may be apparently true in the moment. It may appear to be persistent for a duration of time. But for it to be true, it needs to actually be there continuously, not subject to coming and going. It needs to be independent of circumstance or feeling. And as far as I can tell, the only thing I have discovered that fulfills, fits that criteria is the one behind this mind, this bundle of thoughts that calls itself John, that witnesses all of life unfolding. And you can give it many names, and it doesn't really matter what name you give it, because it doesn't have a name. Traditionally, I think it's referred to as awareness or presence or being. But it's that one that looks out through your eyes in exactly the same way today that it always has, and in exactly the same way that it always will. And by that, I don't mean the lens through which you perceive the world, because today I can look outside of this window and see the sun, and tomorrow the sun may still be shining, but I won't see it because the way I feel has changed. But there is something behind that that perceives that change, and that is not subject to change. And until we have a grasp of this, the entire experience of life is continuously unstable, and we're continuously seeking stability in the one place it can't be found. Because as long as we look for stability in the world, we're looking to something which is, by its very nature, always changing. They say change is the only constant, and there's truth in that. There's truth in that because everything that we see is either in a process of creation or it's in a process of decay. And it may not appear so over a very narrow window of time, but over a long enough time horizon, everything is subject to change. Even the trees and the rocks and the weather and the oceans. Over a long enough period of time, hundreds of thousands and millions of years, we can tell that those things are different. So the very act of calling them true isn't strictly true. And this can create some discomfort or disturbance when we first become aware of it, because, well, if I can't hold on to anything in the world, what can I hold on to? And the only answer is one that can be found on the inside. And not every one of us is motivated to look inside for answers, because looking inside involves looking into the darkness, and traditionally the darkness carries with it the connotation of things which are bad or negative or undesirable. There's a risk that we may discover something about ourselves or our lives that causes us distress, that we don't like, makes us feel in some way inadequate. But the good news is, we look into the darkness as the light. We are not the darkness. We are the light which illuminates the darkness. And when we find things in the darkness, when things are illuminated, we see them for what they are, which is temporary, including aspects of our character which we may up until this point not have been aware of, which we may have suppressed or tried to avoid or done anything not to face. But the second a light is shone upon that, it's seen. And when it's seen, it starts to dissolve. It starts to loosen its grip. Things only have control over us as long as we don't recognize their existence in our lives. As soon as we become aware of the forces and the mechanisms at play, they lose that grip. They lose that ability to have control over us. And there may be some apparent period of time between us recognizing an aspect of our character that doesn't serve us and us no longer paying attention to it when it arises. But the thing is, once it's noticed, that's it. The end is inevitable. And at the deeper level still, once we observe the workings of the mind, once we notice that the mind is constantly, frantically searching for something to hold on to in a world of impermanence, then we can allow it to do that. It doesn't matter. Because we know it's not there. That's not where it exists. To observe the mind seeking stability in a world of impermanence is to be able to view something which is constantly changing from an unchanging place. And this is what gives our life depth. What gives our life depth is the ability to recognize the change, to recognize that at the most basic level, everything we can possibly see and observe on the inside and on the outside is temporary. There is at times a sadness that comes with that, knowing that everything that you love and everything that you hold dear has an end and will come to an end, including you, as you see yourself. But to know that also brings a great sense of appreciation for things as they are. And if you want to create better in your life, the best way to start is to see the beauty of everything which exists now, and to find the gratitude which comes from knowing that maybe whilst some of the things you experience or are surrounded by are not things you would consciously choose, there are other things that you have consciously chosen, and every single one of us has something in our lives which we have chosen to put there. to recognize that even though it is here now, at some point it will pass, which brings us into this intimate connection with appreciation for that thing, for that person, for that aspect of our character we have cultivated, for the fitness we may have in our bodies, or the careers we have, or the families or pets. And from that place of appreciation, to then use the full creative power of the mind to envision something which will lead us more deeply into a life of gratitude and appreciation. These things are wildly overcomplicated, often by people who don't understand them, not because they haven't spent time doing certain things or looking into the nature of themselves, but simply because to acknowledge the truth of oneself as temporary means, as I mentioned on a previous video slightly, accepting and acknowledging death. And that's something that, for those of us certainly who live in the Western world, is largely hidden. It's masked, it's not talked about. And when it's acknowledged, it's made into this enormous, blown out of proportion thing that has to carry with it only sadness. And to come to the end of something doesn't mean we have to be sad, right? It doesn't mean that there is always going to be sadness. Sometimes there is joy. If you're new to these videos, then you won't know that in the last few months my father passed away, and I spent the last 6 weeks of his life by his side, knowing what was coming, being intimately connected to that in every moment I was there, and facing that sense of loss, or the apparent sense of loss that comes when someone leaves their body, but also finding enormous amounts of appreciation for the fact that he has been in my life for the last 39 years. That he set me on this course, consciously or unconsciously. And then when the moment arrived, when he did finally pass, yes, there was sadness. But there was also appreciation. There was the knowing that whilst he may not exist in the form on the outside, he's always in here. And if anything, there is a potential for me to be more in communication with him, closer to him now, beyond the body, than there ever was when he was in form. And I don't expect that to make sense. But I can close my eyes in any moment and talk to him and reach out to him and see him there, just as much as I can with anyone else in my life who has passed, as can you. But to do that requires a conscious use of the mind, which many of us find difficult because we're trying to change the mind from within the mind itself. This is where the realm of techniques comes in, where people say to us that we have to do this many breaths, or take this step, or write this thing down, or listen to this piece of music, or do this meditation. And all of those things have value, they're helpful. But we can only change something when we see it with detachment. And for us to observe the mind in silence allows us to see its workings, allows us to see all of the strangeness and the dysfunction, and also the beauty which exists there. And to tend to it like a garden, where we start to prune away all of the thoughts that don't serve us by recognizing their existence and just not paying attention to them. By recognizing that attention is something that can be consciously directed. And at first, to say again, it does sometimes appear to take practice, but the practice really is just a refining. It's a returning to one's true nature. And the mind would have us believe these things aren't possible. It would have us believe they aren't valuable, they aren't worthwhile. And that's been my experience too, for many years. But the thing is, every now and again, we find, or we come into contact with someone who's persisted, who hasn't given up, who has found a way back to what's more essential in them than the content of their mind and their thoughts. And that doesn't necessarily mean to say that it gives us approval or validation to continue, but it does mean sometimes to recognize that by being in proximity to those who have achieved the things we seek to achieve, we have a greater chance of achieving them because we're attuning ourselves to the frequency or the vibration or the way of being which allows for the expression of those things. And it's my hope that videos of this kind will serve as a reminder or as guidance of some kind for you to continue on your search, if you want to call it a search, or continue in your confirming, if you want to call it that. That there is a power inside of you greater than what your mind would suggest, that has the potential to influence the course of your life in ways that currently may be inconceivable to you, that can lift you from the physical and the mental and the emotional poverty and suffering that so many of us are subject to, and take us into a realm of experience where we start to see possibility, not just for ourselves but for others. Where we start to see a possibility to expand the boundaries of our lives into such forms of expression, such ways where we can enjoy our lives, where we can enjoy the things that we have and continue to pursue more, not because it's going to give us a sense that we are more, but because we can, because it's our nature. Like, all of us are creating in every moment, so we can't help it. It's just that most of us are creating on autopilot. We're creating what our minds are feeding us over and over again, which for so many people is conflict or pain or hardship or suffering or setback or anxiety. And that can change. I'm not going to go into the techniques and the tips and the mechanisms by which that happens, because it's not helpful. What's helpful is to know that it can, to know that your nature is to observe the workings of your mind and the workings of life, and to exert a conscious influence over those things by changing your mind, by entertaining new and more expansive thoughts. If that sounds crazy, then maybe it is crazy, I don't know. But surely it has to be worth considering, worth following, worth listening to. If there's something in that that strikes you as intriguing or curious or valuable, or it resonates in a way that perhaps your mind doesn't necessarily comprehend right now, but there's something in there and you feel to yourself, yeah, I'd like to follow that, then I invite you to do just that. Tell me if this is valuable to you, what you hear for yourself that's new, and how that may affect your life. And please, if you feel so inclined to subscribe or to like or to comment and do those things, then it's really also very helpful for me to extend the reach I hope to have to others in the world who are on a similar track and who want to change that track. And I think there are many of us. And it would be nice to bring more of us together in these spaces where we're not being told what to do, we're not being sold things, we're not being bombarded with loud noises or overstimulating visuals. We're just simply being reminded that everything we want is available to us. And it's as available to us now as it ever has been and ever will be. And perhaps we can connect to that a little more every single time.